Hello, this is KSQD Santa Cruz and KSQT Prunedale. You are listening to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, PK Haddis. My guest today is writer Steve Kettmann. He's here to talk about Dusty Baker, who spent nearly 50 years in professional baseball as both a player and coach before stepping away from the game in 2023. Kettmann co-authored Baker's autobiography called Crossroads, a memoir in baseball and life, in which Baker reflects on his career and the lessons it taught him about leadership, perseverance, and living a life of meaning. Baker holds a special place in the hearts of many Bay Area sports fans, most notably for serving as the Giants manager from 1993 through 2002, a tenure that included 3 National League Manager of the Year awards and a World Series appearance. As a player, Baker was an all-star, a batting champion, and a Gold Glove winner. Though the Giants lost the 2002 championship, Baker would finish his career with 2 World Series victories, one as a player with the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1981, and another as a manager with the Houston Astros in 2022. Kettmann also has an impressive resume in his own right, though he much prefers a pen over a bat. He has authored more than 15 books, including 7 New York Times bestsellers, and he worked for years as a Bay Area reporter and sports writer. Kettmann also runs a small writers' retreat center in the hills above Soquel called Wellstone Center, and he's also publisher of Wellstone Books. The duo will appear at a Bookshop Santa Cruz event June 8th, which includes a free book talk and a ticketed photo line. So without further ado, Steve, thanks so much for coming on Talk of the Bay.
Hey, it's great to be here talking to you.
So let's just start with your involvement in this book, Crossroads. Just walk us through how you got involved. How do you know Dusty?
Well, as a little bit of background, your very kind intro said that I've written 7 New York Times bestsellers as author, which I would like to be true. I would like to tell my kids that. But actually, I've done 7 books as co-author.
Okay.
So that's everything from, I wrote a book called Juiced with Jose Canseco about steroids that hit number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And then I've done a number of books with some Democratic Party politicians. Terry McAuliffe continues to be a good friend of mine. He was the DNC chair. And also, actually with the first book that we did 2 books. But he ended up being governor of Virginia, and then he was governor when there was the whole Unite the Right rally, in where the Nazis came to town. Mm-hmm. So we did another book on that. The reason I mention all of that is I was a baseball writer in the 90s for the San Francisco Chronicle. I used to play basketball with a young assistant general manager by the name of Billy Bean.
Really? Sounds familiar.
Yeah, people might have heard of him. Brad Pitt, I guess, a little bit better looking, but
maybe a bit. We won't tell Billy that.
Oh,
maybe
yeah,
he knows.
He's heard. But Billy, was a really interesting guy. Always very bright. We would always talk about books that he was reading. He loves The Clash. We would talk about that. But I did the time as a beat guy. Writing about pitching changes and all that. But then in 1999, I did something that people thought was really weird. I gave up a job at the Chronicle after 9 years, 5 weeks of vacation, pension, and all that.
Not bad.
And I had done some work as a foreign correspondent before, and I was just really drawn to Europe with the changes happening there, in particular Berlin, where in November 1989, the Berlin Wall had come down, ending an era. And so 10 years later, a little bit less than 10 years, I moved to Berlin. So then I was totally away from baseball. And I was Berlin correspondent for Wired. I would do stuff for Salon and did different things. And it was a good gig. I would go around Europe and it was interesting. But, I did miss baseball a little bit. I actually flew in one year. My brother flew from Berlin directly to SFO. And my brother picked me up at the airport, and we went straight to the ballpark for a World Series game. But so I've always loved baseball. And then over the last, 20 years, I've been able to do a lot of storytelling through baseball. My first book was called One Day at Fenway as author. I did a whole book about one game between the Red Sox and the Yankees. Mm-hmm. That, life is all about making your own luck, right? And you do that by having good timing. And the book came out. I predicted that the Red Sox would win the World Series. 2 months later, they did. Mm. So
Any lottery advice for our listeners?
I'm out of the prediction game.
Okay, gotcha.
It's gotten way too expensive now. But there was a movie called Fever Pitch that the Farrelly brothers did.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Fallon,
right?
Yeah,
right. Good movie.
And Drew Barrymore, and they loved my book so much they brought me onto the set at Fenway to sit in the director's chair between them.
Oh wow!
And it was funny because it's not like I had a thing for Drew Barrymore or anything, but I kind of thought it'd be fun to sort of talk to her. And like Fallon was there, and he was great. He was really friendly, but he was so friendly I could never like say, "Oh, that's great, Jimmy." But I kind of wanted to talk to Drew just a little bit. So never happened. But I mention all of that background because Dusty Baker is a man whose significance to a lot of people is really unique. People feel like he embodies certain qualities. Just being real, keeping it real, being honest, being generous, really caring about people, but at the same time, an extremely competitive individual who, interesting fact about Dusty, the man does have a temper. He's got the laid back California guy going, but he does have a bit of a temper. I never saw it directly, toward me. But I know that he does, and he kind of jokes about it.
He must have gotten tossed from a few ball games, right? Or I feel like watching him, I grew up a Giants fan. Yeah. I feel like he kept his cool pretty good as a manager, but maybe he let it out in the clubhouse.
I would point to, if you're going to ask about that, not so much getting tossed. He wasn't really the kind of guy to go berserk on the umpire. Mm-hmm. He had his moments. But there was one memorable moment where Tony La Russa and him, who had always liked each other, just really got into it. And you just saw on TV where they just were like, dropping a lot of F-bombs on each other. And they were pissed.
Sure.
They were definitely pissed. But so the point I wanted to make is I was very glad that I had done all of the books I had done before I started this project. Dusty and I had done a little book called Kiss the Sky, which has an awesome cover art by Mark Ulrichsen, who's done about 70 New Yorker magazine covers. And he's a friend, and I got him, we paid him, but we got him to do original art of Hendrix burning his guitar. Mm-hmm. Highly recommend people just look up that cover because it's that cool. And then we did that little book talking really about sort of portrait of a future Hall of Famer, most likely, as a young man. Because in 1967, he had a lot of decisions to make about what his future was and who he wanted to be as a man. So I had done that. And so when this opportunity arose, Dusty and I took a long time, thinking about the publisher and all that. Then we took a long time doing the book. We really worked 2 years on the project. Mm-hmm.
Well, you sort of touched on a lot of different things about the book and about Dusty and about your own journey to this friendship that you have with him that are really interesting for us to dive into. One thing I just wanted to hold on was you mentioned 1967. So tell me about 1967, why it was such a consequential year for Dusty. And I understand that that's around the time he kind of got exposed to Santa Cruz because he's a California kid, right?
Yeah, so he grew up in Riverside, east of LA, and a very mixed community, by the way. Maybe a third Latino, maybe a third black, maybe a third white, and they all played sports together, and it was like never a thing. No one, you didn't give a shit. Like three black guys on one team, whatever. You didn't notice. And his dad was always his coach. His dad cut him twice, famously, but and his dad was also coach to Bobby Bonds, which is important in the longer story. But then when he was 16, his dad got transferred. The family moved north to near Sacramento. And Dusty, on the first day of school, looked around and saw his brother during lunch break. And he said to his brother, "You see any black guys here?" And his brother looked at him and said no. And Dusty, he said, "Yeah, you." They were the only two black guys in the whole school. So it was a big transition for Dusty. And, that was a sort of big part of shaping who he was, that he always got along with different people. But then Dusty loved basketball and he loved football. Those were the sports that he loved. And he had many scholarships offers to go to San Jose State or Santa Clara, and on a scholarship. It's 1967. You're going to have a very good time on the college campus. You can infer whatever you want, fill in the blanks. But he was going to have a good time. He was going to play sports, and he was going to get an education, which both of his parents had stressed from early childhood was a really important goal for him. But then something about the move north, it didn't go that well for his mom. She missed family, missed her community, and the marriage ended up not working out. So his parents got divorced, and basically the finances of the family shifted a little. His dad always worked 2 jobs to take care of the family, which he continued to do. But so Dusty felt like, as the oldest son, the oldest child of 5, that it was his responsibility to bring in some money. And if he went to college on a scholarship, he'd have a great time, but he wasn't going to be bringing money in to the family. So he took a pretty big risk and decided to go for it in baseball. So that was his really main decision that he had. I mean, the thing about it, it was all in, this is one reason we did the earlier book the way we did. It was all in June 1967. So if you're into, for you, this is all, ancient history. But, I was 5, so it's not like my lived experience. But there was a song, and I can't sing at all, but, if you're going to, maybe, can you do it? If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
Of course.
Yeah. But that literally was on the airwaves that week as Dusty and a friend drove down for Monterey Pop. This is all right around the same weeks in June. And then Dusty, there was the baseball draft. Dusty prayed, kneeled and prayed, please, God, anywhere but the South. He did not want to go to the racist South in the late 1960s. So the draft happens. Atlanta Braves draft him. And he thinks he's not going anyway, so he doesn't care that much, but realizes that this is the decision he's going to need to make for the family. And so he did go down to L.A. with his mom and met Hank Aaron, took the field at Dodger Stadium. Now, he had grown up a Dodger fan. So think about it. You're a kid. You're out there. And the fans are all over him. Hey, no name. Hey, no number. Giving him a hard time. But, Hank Aaron promised Dusty's mom at that point that if he did choose baseball, that Hank would look out for him, that he would be like a second father to him. And that was a vow that he fully lived up to. And in the book Crossroads, that to me is really the thing about the book that I love so much, is it's really a book about learning from what life hands you. And, Hank taught Dusty a lot of things, but a couple of things he taught him were, one was he'd be talking to Dusty, and we've all been in this situation, some would-be mentor or teachers trying to learn you on something, and he'd say to Dusty, you know what I'm saying to you? And Dusty would say, yeah, I got it. And Hank would say, no, you don't. But listen to what I'm saying and try to remember it. And then years later, with luck, you might be able to take what I'm telling you now and add it up and then make it work for you in your life then, basically. And you know what? All these years later, Dusty still lives by that. And it's an amazing thing. And I apply that to my own life, where I do more of that now. Because the whole culture, like even social media with likes, and you kind of are always trying to do an instant opinion. And this was like, wow, it's kind of intense, actually, to think about that. Remember what people said, because maybe you were wrong at the time. Maybe you dismissed some advice that was good. Maybe you were too full of yourself to really listen. And so I really value the wisdom in the book.
So tell me more about that early part of his life, that couple big crossroads that he ran into as a young man. Thankfully, he had mentors like the great Hank Aaron, of course, the home run champion of Major League Baseball for many years, who was, I'm guessing, at least a decade, 15 years, maybe older than Dusty. But tell me about what kind of ball player Dusty ended up being, because he was young. I mean, he entered the majors as a 18, 19-year-old kid, and he excelled. I mean, he turned into a great ball player. But tell me about what kind of a player he was.
Well, to me, what's so fascinating about Dusty as an actual player, first of all, he did have amazing teachers. I mean, Orlando Cepeda, Satchel Paige was this great, practically a vaudeville act of the
right.
Negro
There's
Leagues.
a great biography of Satchel Paige. I'm not sure who the author is, but
there's a bunch of books.
Probably a bunch, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Quite the
Larry Ty, is that it? I think did one Satch book. There's this guy, one of Gavin Newsom's political consultants, Ace something has a Satch book. But the thing is, we all read books about Satch. Dusty was like 19, playing in the big leagues with the Braves, carrying Satchel Paige's fishing poles around, which is what he did. He was his caddy, in a baseball term. And, there's a lot of different ways to learn stuff. It's not all like whatever analytics. And like Satchel was he would just talk and they would listen. Him and Ralph Garr was another great young hitter. But what to me is really interesting about the Dusty story, again, related to over time, was he was a great athlete. He could play baseball. He was fast. That was his game. But, he didn't love baseball, really. As I said, he loved basketball, he loved football, and he didn't really love baseball. What he says is he had his years with the Braves, which I should know the number, of course, but it might have been 5 or 6 seasons. It probably depends how you count, because those early seasons he wasn't getting a lot of playing time. And then they traded him. They were dismantling. They were going to sell the team to Ted Turner, who I think just died. But they kept kidding him. They were going to trade him to Cleveland, which at the time was a place you did not want to go.
Sort of still is a little bit, right?
Well, I like Cleveland, but I mean baseball wise also.
Right? No, the team. Anyway, that was just a shot at the Cleveland Indians. Sorry, all the fans out there.
I think they changed their name at some point.
Oh, right, that's right. Guardians. My apologies.
Oh yeah, we're good. We're good. So they kidded him about basically sending him to baseball purgatory, But in the end, they sent him to the Dodgers, which was the greatest gift they could give him. And then check it out. He goes to the Dodgers. He's happy about it. And then, like I say, doesn't love baseball, loves basketball. He knows he can't be playing pickup basketball, but he went and played and tore up his knee. And so he had a season as a Dodger where he just flat out sucked. He couldn't play. He was on, one leg. And they couldn't operate because that's then admitting that, they screwed up and they traded for damaged goods. It would make him look bad. Al Campanis, was who traded for him. So he had to suffer through this really brutal year where the Dodger fans were booing him at home all the time. And then finally, after that year, Dr. Frank Jobe, the great Dr. Frank Jobe, operated on him and really did a great job. And then he rehabbed his way back. And then this is where you get to, he was better than ever, really, overall. He worked hard. He got stronger. And then at the last day of the season, they had 3 players who had all hit 30 home runs. I'm going to say Reggie Smith, Steve Garvey, and Ron Say most likely. And so Dusty was at 29. And if Dusty hit home run number 30, they'd be the first team ever to have 4 guys hit 30 in a year, right? So Dusty hits it on the last day of the season against J.R. Richard, who could throw, man. He was probably the pitcher Dusty most hated to face in that era. So he comes around to score. His teammate batting next, parenthetically, the first openly gay player in baseball history, Glenn Burke, who later, had AIDS and lived in the streets of Oakland, a sad story. At that time was, Pete Kell, full of joy, came out and threw his hand up at Dusty, and then Dusty threw his hand up, and that is what's considered the first high five. It wasn't really the first high five, but it popularized the high five and helped the high five get huge. And it was about joy. So Dusty went from not really loving baseball to really loving it, and that took it to another level, and that took him as a player to another level. And then he was in the National League Championship Series of, I'm going to get the year wrong, but one of those years, he was the MVP. So that's a very meaningful distinction.
Wasn't he the first National League Championship Series MVP?
Right. They didn't keep the stat before that. So, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I was going to bring up the high five history there. You beat me to it, but it's not as if he needs another claim to fame because he's so accomplished. But wow, what a cool story to be a part of. Steve, I believe the book's coming out in early next month, right? And I mentioned you're doing an event at Bookshop Santa Cruz. And so you published a great piece in the Good Times, a weekly here in Santa Cruz County that kind of uses some quotes from the book, and in my mind kind of acts as a little tease of what's in the book. And there's a quote that you use in that piece in the Good Times from Dusty that I just wanted to read because I think it says quite a bit about him as a player and him as a person that's unique and kind of fits in with Santa Cruz, actually, in my opinion. But we'll discuss that more. So you're quoting him, and you say, and he starts in, "If you don't trust your feelings, you can never be a great hitter," Dusty writes in Crossroads. Quote, "If you feel it, it's probably true. That was what Hank Aaron taught us. If something tells you that the pitcher is going to throw you an outside fastball, he's probably going to throw you an outside fastball. If you have a feeling you want to take a pitch, take a pitch. If Hank took a pitch, he always had a reason, whether it was to see the movement or the late break or whatever," end quote. So I just thought that was such a out of time quote about sports and about, it's just so much of sports these days is analytics and it's all ones and zeros and percentages. And for him to be talking about feeling first and foremost above all for what makes you a great hitter, quoting the great Hank Aaron, I was just so struck by, and it was just like a breath of fresh air for me, really. So I just was hoping you could tell me more about, am I reading too much into this quote, or does it really kind of say something about the kind of player, manager, but also person that Dusty is?
Absolutely. No, you're right at the center. That is right at the center of everything. I mean, I mentioned the quote, the Hank lesson about remembering what I say. That and trust your feelings are the foundation to everything. Because if on the one hand you're alert and you're always thinking and you're remembering and you're always noticing in life and in sports, you're keeping your eyes open. You're not distracted by feeling sorry for yourself because, you should have, that line drive and the fourth should have dropped, or that umpire should have given me that call, and you're like kind of whining about it, Dusty always liked to talk about, this is, I think, related. I also did a book, by the way, with Pete Rose called Play Hungry, another of my bestsellers. And, I wrote it with Pete. But and one time at first base, when Pete was going through some stuff, he told Dusty, here's how I do it, Dusty. Because, like all of us, Dusty's had his, some stuff he was dealing with. And Pete said, I come here to the ballpark. This is my refuge. This is how all that other stuff is away. And that really resonates with Dusty. He still brings that up. I think a week or two ago when I was with him, he brought it up again. And it's like if you tune everything out and you pay attention, then you can trust your feelings. You see, it all goes together. It's not just trust your feelings, all by itself. Because that can lead to like, hey, you know what? I want to just leave this interview right now, man. I'm not feeling it. Sorry. And I go and you get to talk to your engineer. I'm sure that would be cool.
Yeah, it'd be cool in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, in a different way. Or we could listen to the tunes that we're going to listen to at some point. But you hear what I'm saying. And so in other words, you get some of that California cool kind of go with the flow, but then you're kind of connecting it to something else, which is remembering the larger purpose of what you're doing. And that is something that Dusty was able to do. Being a baseball manager, how about this? I'll tease one more book.
Please.
It is called The Manager. It will be published in July 2027. Dusty writes the introduction. It'll be by me, Steve Kettmann, and Pedro Gomez, former ESPN baseball. He's been dead 5 years, so he's not doing a lot of the writing now,
right?
But
he's a great friend of yours, as I understand it.
He was a great friend of mine, and we covered ball together. But But this idea of trust your feelings. I mean, look, Billy, we talked about Billy Beane, and, obviously I have complex thoughts about Billy. Moneyball, Michael Lewis is a great guy also, and he's obviously extremely gifted at telling a story. I happen to have been really close to Art Howe, who was depicted, I think, unfairly in the book. And then
former manager of the A's, correct?
The former manager of the A's. And then in the movie, you got Brad Pitt playing, Billy Beane as, the second coming of, I don't know what, the coolest guy ever, basically. And then you have Philip Seymour Hoffman chewing the scenery as this schlumpy, whiny loser as the manager. But so that none of that is Billy Beane's fault. But what I will point out is the central sort of trick of Moneyball is to try to explain away the fact that Billy Beane was a top prospect, a first rounder, who didn't trust his feelings as a big league hitter. He just didn't. I'm not knocking him for that. He's a great athlete. Again, I play basketball with him. He's a great athlete, a great guy. He's also, I consider him a friend to this day. We still email. But I'm just saying, sometimes in sports, you get up there, you have your moment. Like I think of Eminem, the iconic.
Right.
Can you tell me this?
One shot, I think, is the song called. I don't know. I'm not well versed.
Yeah. But that idea, and then you don't come through in your shot, basically. Now, Billy Beane didn't only have one shot, but he had like Lenny Dykstra as his roommate, and he was intense. He was passionate. For whatever reason, things didn't quite work, So he wanted another explanation for that, is that really the scouts were wrong to think he was such a good ball player. And I say, no, that's not. They weren't. Billy Beane was an extremely talented ball player who could have had a good, big league career. In fact, I wonder if Dusty Baker had been a manager to a young Billy Beane, if Billy Beane might not have, got a few more knocks. Mm-hmm. This is all original, by the way. I've never shared these thoughts. But it all goes back to trust your feelings and what it means. Mm-hmm. And I think that it can definitely apply as well in life, not just treating people decently, but and I wrote about this in the Good Times piece about how Dusty does inspire me to try to be a better person. So I think that one reason I don't like the hype of the analytics era, can I say that here? No. And I don't like corporate, jerks, whatever, who only care about the bottom line and are happy to, screw people over and then talk about, it's just business. Well, no, it's just you screwing people over, And so all of this body of thought is like, first the Moneyball stuff said, you never bunt, and then you do bunt. Then no stolen bases. But speed's actually, undervalued commodity that now we're going to emphasize. So my point is, there's no compass heading there. It's not a way forward. It's just one more tool. And analytics in baseball has been great. There's been a ton of interesting work done in that area. And it especially got interesting when the observational side of it exploded, like defensive stats, because you've got all these cameras. But the more that you add on, you have to always come back to trust your feelings. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's writing an article, I think for the New York Times, but it'll be the Athletic. Daniel Brown, formerly of the San Jose Mercury News, who's a really great sports writer. And he got to go to Sacramento and hang with Dusty to write an article. And he was talking about how he sees a through line in the book, in Crossroads, where all the stories are leading towards something. And so you take trust your feelings, which I love that you were all over that. Then you go all the way forward to Dusty has been with all these different teams as a manager. He took more teams to the postseason than anyone in baseball history. That's a fact.
I didn't know that. Wow.
He goes into Houston, a very tough situation, the under the cloud of scandal. And, Dusty's the one man in baseball who has so much credibility and goodwill that he could step in and sort of help them rebound and deal with some of that. Then they have one, a good year or two, and then it's his year. He knows it. He's got the World Series coming up. He knows he's got the team to win. And I think he prayed on it. He thought about it, and he decided, you know what? I'm going to trust my feelings more than ever. Like he doubled down on it. like on certain things, which he talks about in the book, but he just decided, I'm gonna go with it. This is who I am. This is what I know. And, he managed his ass off. They won the World Series. And it was, which, means that he'll almost for sure be going into the Hall of Fame next July.
Right. Seems like I was surprised to learn that in your piece that he wasn't already in the Hall of Fame. So
feels like it.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks so much for elaborating on that, because especially on the point I just wanted to add really, really quick to, which is that you get the sense, I think, in your piece in The Good Times that, yes, it is important to go on your feeling, as Dusty would say. But as you said, it's not just, hey, whichever direction the wind is blowing, go with it. It's going with your feelings, something that's earned, and it requires patience. And that's something analytics can provide you. It's a quick route to the answer, and you don't have to kind of go through that nitty-gritty, those failures and that patience that's required to kind of intuitively know what's best in a certain situation in a ball game. And that's an important lesson that I think Dusty has to teach us, and all of us, as you said, in sports and in life. Steve, I want to go transition a bit to Dusty the manager. We've talked a lot about his upbringing and his time as a player, which was, quite accomplished. But I grew up a Giants fan, and so what I think of when I think of Dusty Baker is the Giants manager, sitting cool, calm, and collected in the dugout, managing Barry Bonds, Jeff Kent, big personalities, and you were around all of that I believe as a sports writer during that era. Tell me about your observations. Before you really knew Dusty well, I assume you spent quite a lot of time covering him. Tell me about what it was like being around that clubhouse.
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time covering because I covered the Oakland A's.
Oh, you're an A's beat reporter.
That was helpful because it meant that Dusty and I didn't have that sort of underlying edge that can come with the beat writers, because you just see each other every day. But I was always intensely interested in Dusty. I mean, I always loved him as manager from the beginning. And one thing about Dusty is, like, again, back to the analytics crowd, but to me, like, the manager in the right kind of city, the right kind of market where people really care about the team, and there's a tradition of sort of great fans. I just think of New York, Boston, Chicago, Philly, and these different. You want to have a manager who has some personality and who the community embraces as an extension of themselves. And this helps, because there's ups and downs, but it also makes the sweet part sweeter. And Dusty, so thoroughly embodied that role. So did Bruce Bochy, who, by the way, is a friend, and I did a book with him, a book of walks that we published. But Dusty was like, he felt like our version of cool. This was cool, and it was cool to be a Giants fan. The new ballpark opens and all that. So that's an important part. And another thing is, working 10 years on a book about managers, I feel I can speak on this subject with some authority. And most average fans don't really understand too well what the job is. These like pitching changes and stuff. And, yes, that matters. And yes, guys will make mistakes. But a lot of times there are reasons why they don't have the freedom of choice that you think they do, or they've got things in mind that you're not even aware of. And I'll give an example of that, which I think we do talk about briefly in the book. But sometimes if you're a manager, like let's say you've got a young player who doesn't have a lot of experience in the heat of October postseason baseball, maybe you give that player the chance to sort of come through, or maybe not, just to know where their head's at. And then you might need that player later. So you'll take a calculated risk. And, you always hear like sort of sports talk radio where they're talking, oh, well, why did he do that? No, it's not clear the way you think it's clear. And then there's the other part that you need as a manager to be able to understand each of your players in this sort of emotionally three-dimensional. If they're fighting with their wife, or, their girlfriend's pregnant or whatever, even if you don't know about it directly, all of it is sort of part of what you're doing, and so like Dusty would do things like, there was a great story where, and I was just up there, McCovey Cove right there, it's so gorgeous and picturesque. And like after certain like 12, 15 day games, Dusty would bring a group of guys out to go fish. And so they had the boat waiting. It was a really quick game, and I'm not going to burn the individual to say it, but one thing you never do in baseball is say like, wow, the game's going so fast. But that is what the rookie did. It was like the seventh inning, it was zipping along, and it ended up going extra innings, no fishing. But that kind of thing, or music, Dusty would often go out to see live music with guys, and he wasn't doing it like, whatever, like scheming or whatever, calculating. That's the word I was after. It was just who he was, that he wanted to get to know them. He knew he could help them more if they understood each other more in different ways. And so doing all of that, I think Dusty with the Giants those years was really, and again, I've studied, Connie Mack, John McGraw, manager after manager after manager. I've spent hours and hours and hours looking at newspaper articles from the 19th century. And like what Dusty did with the Giants, in those two senses of being like Tommy Lasorda, who I always hated as a Giants fan, but he did that thing where the whole community, he was recognizably a symbol of the Dodgers, an extension of the personality. Dusty did that whole part, like being the mayor of San Francisco. And, I've talked to Gavin Newsom about it, who was mayor of San Francisco in that period. He totally agrees, he loved it, but then also the understanding all of your guys. So there's that whole part. And then I think baseball, Dusty as a game manager, I think he's a great game manager. If I some billionaire friend or acquaintance, like let's say I'm writing a book for some mega billionaire, and he's like, oh, I was thinking of buying a baseball team. Any suggestions? Oh, run it for me. It's not going to happen probably, but I don't know. I do meet billionaires who want me to write their books, and so Dusty's probably a little, at 76, soon to be 77 next month. He probably wouldn't want to get back to managing a big league team, but I would hire him in a second myself. I think he's that good.
Mm-hmm. Are there any modern managers in the game now that you think are cut from the same cloth in that same tradition as Dusty Baker? You mentioned Bruce Bochy. He, of course, came to mind for me, too. It's sort of easy to just think of kind of the old school guys. A lot of these younger up-and-comers, Tony Vitello is as young and new as it comes. But he does have some personality, that shines through, which is, he has certainly a lot of flaws as a manager, but I feel like there's some consensus that there's something there with a personality and it brings some intangible. I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about any managers that come to mind that you think Dusty has some kinship with.
Well, I like Tony, and since you mentioned it, I'm also writing a chapter on him in my book, and my chapter is going to be Tony Vitello on learning on the job, because unfortunately that's what they put him in the position of doing, because he didn't have any professional experience. And so, for example, if you've got a bunch of veterans on the team who, if you've been in a baseball clubhouse, there's a lot of strutting and posturing, and the veterans tend to want to, kind of do whatever they want. And if you've never managed a veteran, when you think about it, if you're in college, what do you have? You've got first-year students, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So they're all younger than you, and as you have a little bit longer career, as Tony did, and have more success, they're a lot younger than you. So you're not used to these guys that have all this time in the game. And so I feel Tony was put in a difficult position. But I do agree with your point. I actually do think that he's the kind of guy who, I think if he can get through this, if the Giants' year this year is not too disastrous.
We're teetering a bit.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I mean, I don't think they're going to fire Vitello, but I do think it could be do sort of damage to the project of developing as a big league manager. But I think he is someone who could put the different pieces together. And, Buster Posey very much is of this school. He loved Bochy as well. And Bochy is, Bochy called the analytics guys the propeller heads. We were just kidding about that. This is pretty cool. I was up at a Giants game in a booth with Dusty and Bochy. Two guys who are probably going into the Hall next July together. But other guys, I'm looking. There's no one who's really impressed me yet, but it might be that I don't know, that I'm not paying enough attention.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I do want to talk also about his life Dusty, that is, his life outside of baseball. Because it does seem like that his interests are broad. And again, I think it does kind of contribute to this whole person sense that you get. I've never met Dusty, but I've certainly observed him on television and seen him in interviews. And it's just like you say, he just seems like a cool guy that you'd want to hang out with. And if you watch him in a game, you have complete confidence that he knows what he's doing. And there's a part of that of leaning into who you are, which I think you've been talking about as well, and Dusty does that very well. But it's clear also from reading your Good Time story, and I'm sure from reading the book, that his life isn't all baseball. He's got plenty of interests outside of it, including this 1967 trip that we were talking about in the Monterey Pop Festival. Obviously, he has an interest in music. That's a legendary show. Tell me a bit about, maybe I could just ask about music. We could start from there. What's his relationship to music? Is it a lifelong passion? Is it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely a lifelong passion. And that was a really fun thing about working with him. We'd be sitting there in his office, and the way he did it, it's kind of back to trust your feelings, like go with your feelings, because he would always just ask, Siri or whatever, like, just play music. And he would pick something, and they were incredibly eclectic and diverse. I mean, it would be like soul funk, and then he might go for, I don't know, so like kind of random 70s rock that you wouldn't expect necessarily him to like. And then, hardcore blues, a little Stevie Wonder. It's just, and for him, it is, and I've talked about it with him numerous times, including for the first book, but it's partly, I guess in meditation or therapy, we spend time trying to let our emotions be more kind of clearer, less muddled versions of themselves. So, and then we say something is therapy for something, for someone, that's kind of a shorthand. What we're really talking about is trying to get to a place where we're both more understanding of our own emotions and we feel them more clearly. And so for Dusty, that constant search, and it's joyous, it's fun for him, but it's all about feeling the moment in the right way. So music for him that way is huge. It also continued to give him a bridge to the younger players, because he could talk about any music, and he would go see, he still goes to see live music, and he's got a lot of good friends who are musicians. Elvin Bishop is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was at a Elvin gig with Dusty like 4 or 5 years ago, I think, and they're fishing buddies with also Tom Steenstra, who I should mention. Tom and Dusty are good friends, and Dusty wrote the preface to Tom's great new book, which is called Heaven Delayed, and it's about his near-death experiences where he felt like he was visited by spirits. He's got great stories about it. He was at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco last night talking about the book, which I'm the publisher of, but it's called Heaven Delayed. It's at Bookshop Santa Cruz as well, and it's available online, but I highly recommend checking it out. For anyone who, you don't have to be, I'm in my 60s, you don't have to be in your 60s thinking about death. You could be just thinking about what is it all about and what does happen after death. It approaches some of that in a way that's pretty easy to take, coupled with a love of nature and all these amazing experiences of having a grizzly bear want to eat him, and going after a great white shark, and ending up in freezing water when he's out on a fishing trip. So if it sounds like something that might interest you, please check it out.
Is Dusty a spiritual or religious guy? It sounds like very much so, but I wanted to ask.
Very much so. He was raised in the church, the Southern Baptist tradition. He was I'm going to forget the terminology. But every Sunday, they basically spent the day at church. He was a junior deacon, and his dad was a deacon. They all sang in the choir, the family, and that was a very important thing for him. He would go to church, and then he jokes that he was never a pool player because the one pool hall in town was right next to the church in Riverside, and there was someone always looking out the window. And if you tried to sneak in the pool hall, your parents were going to find out quick, and he'd get his butt whipped. So yes, and then to this day, he's explored spirituality in different ways. He and I have some of the best conversations about God and religion that I've ever had, including when my own dad died about 2.5 weeks ago.
Oh wow! I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you, but it's pretty heavy to be able to talk to someone like Dusty. And we were sitting there talking. San Francisco, just sitting in a parked car talking about it, and it's just something about the way Dusty is, where he just kind of cuts right to the heart of the matter, including how there's probably a lot of the Father and the Son, and even though even if you kind of think there isn't, it's like, whoa, no, there actually is, and then you kind of it's just something that you kind of look at from different angles over the course of your own lifetime. And that's an example of spirituality in that sense, of like when his dad passed and things like that, where Dusty is very attuned spiritually.
Mm-hmm. You've worked with so many authors, you've worked with so many managers, co-authoring these books with them, and managers and players. You mentioned Pete Rose, Bruce Bochy. I mean, these are legendary figures in the game. And of course, Dusty here. What stands out to you about working with Dusty versus all these other guys?
Well, an interesting thing to mention, because we talk about the, smoked a joint with Jimi Hendrix and very California and just a cool guy. I mean, fun to hang out with. Tony Vitello, when I flew down to Arizona just to see Tony for, like 20 minutes. That's what it's like as a book author. That's what you have to do. And we were talking about how he had given his Mount Rushmore of the great baseball figures. And he had mentioned Dusty as one of them. And I asked why. And he's like, Dusty, can I hang out with you? That was like the first thing he said, which is exactly what you just said. But so there's that whole cool, fun guy to hang out with. But Dusty works very hard. And I'll give you an example. Most books are maybe 75 or 80,000 words long. This book is 162,000 words long. And writing a book that's twice the length, kind of like a double album for Dusty, for people of Dusty's in my era, when you actually had LPs and double album, you actually open it up. But it's like a double album of a book it's not twice as hard or twice as much work. It's 4 times or 8 times. We did all of that, and Dusty admittedly was a little fried, as was I. And then we're doing things like the photo captions and picking the photos. And he always has to feel that he's done the right amount of work to get it right. It matters to him so much, which is, you put it all together nicely before when you were talking about trust your feelings, but then take care of the other side of it. And I know that Dusty did not succeed as a future Hall of Fame manager without being incredibly hardworking and committed to detail. But I'm pretty intense that way myself. It has a lot to do with why I've ended up with 7 New York Times bestsellers. But, I do the work. And Dusty, could hang with me all day long. And we just sort of drove each other to just keep doing the work, which, a lot of times that's just like there's a story and then, I'll do more research to find little details about it. Not so much to confirm Dusty's version, because his memory is really good, but just to kind of get in a little deeper and explore some other things. So that amazed me about working with him more than anything, just that kind of love of getting it right by just doing the work, even if it means you got to put other stuff off. You got to, strike some difficult balance sometimes, but he's very committed to that. And, I really urge people to read the book Crossroads. Get it, and please consider you can find me on Twitter, by the way, or X, Steve Kettmann, 2 T's, 2 N's. I'm just super interested to hear from actual people who might actually pick up the book and read it, because I've been around books, I've written about books, I've published books, authored books, and to me, it's just a really special book where a lot of honest feeling, perspective, and gravitas is really in the book. And I don't know if that comes through to, every reader. I think it came through to you. So I'd really love to hear from people. I mean, Amazon reviews are obviously great, but there's this weird culture that's kind of popped up where, like, even the professional reviewers, they don't really talk. It doesn't sound like real people talking to other real people. It sounds like a shtick. So that's why I would love to hear from some real people. I don't know if we got any. No one's read the book yet, but I'm curious if we have any callers. No
callers yet. I don't see the light flashing. Maybe somebody can sneak in at the last moment. 831-900-5773. We really only have a couple minutes left here, so this is kind of a loaded question, but I want to sneak it in if I can.
Sure.
Because I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about Barry Bonds and Dusty's relationship with Barry Bonds. Not necessarily his relationship, but I mean, he literally spent countless hours with the two greatest hitters in baseball history. I mean, like, as close as you can be. So what would he say about that? If he were to reflect on it, maybe he has lessons learned from the two of them or things like that. Again, we just have a couple minutes left here, so I hate to ask this question at this time, but maybe we could close there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, Dusty held Barry Bonds the day that he was born in his arms at the hospital, and their families were close. And, Dusty idolized Bobby Bonds. That was his hero. He wanted to be like Bobby Bonds, a 4-sport athlete, also with track. So he managed Barry. And, Barry was a difficult personality at times. I mentioned Pedro Gomez. He followed him around for ESPN for 2 years.
Wow, what
that
an
was
assignment.
Not pretty.
Yeah, really.
But, what Dusty would say about Barry is, first of all, he's one of the smartest hitters ever. You can talk about the body and different things, but Barry understood the pitcher, what was coming. He thought baseball and felt baseball as I think no one ever had. I mean, Dusty says Barry was the smartest player of his period. So that would be, people focus on other things, but being baseball smart is ultimately what it's all about. And Dusty is as baseball smart as they come as a manager, and Barry as a slugger brought that to an incredible level.
That's an interesting way to put it, and it sure makes a lot of sense if you track both of their careers and their time together. We will have to end it there. I've been talking with Steve Kettmann about his new book, Crossroads, a memoir about former Giants manager Dusty Baker, who co-authored the book alongside Kettmann. Kettmann will be appearing alongside Dusty right here in Santa Cruz at Bookshop Santa Cruz on June 8th, I believe. Yes, that's right, June 8th. Steve, thank you so much for just a really fascinating conversation, and all the sports fans, all you KSQD listeners who love the Giants the way I do. It was just a real treat to sit down with you and hear all these stories. So thanks so much for joining Talk of the Bay. I hope you'll come back on again sometime.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed it.